All right, let's jump right in. The prophet Ezekiel, he wasn't just giving speeches, he was painting pictures. These incredibly powerful prophetic sermons that were really designed to just shatter a nation's delusions. So today, we're going to unpack three of his most vivid allegories, right from chapters 15 through 17 of his book. Now, to really get why Ezekiel's message was so shocking, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the people living in Jerusalem at the time. I mean, they were totally convinced their city was invincible. They had the psalm, they had the temple, and look, they had history on their side. They all remembered the story of the great Assyrian king Sennacherib, who showed up with this massive army only to have 185,000 of his soldiers wiped out in a single night. So to them, Jerusalem was God's city, period. It could not fall. And that, right there, leads us to the central, absolutely terrifying question of this whole part of the Bible. If God was in their midst, if their city was his holy place, then why was the Babylonian army about to burn the whole thing to the ground? This is the core problem Ezekiel had to confront, this deep-seated and really dangerous false sense of security. So how in the world did Ezekiel answer that question? Well, he used these three powerful picture sermons we're talking about: the story of a useless vine, the story of an unfaithful wife, and this riddle about two great eagles. And you'll see, each one peels back another layer of Israel's unfaithfulness, but they also, amazingly, point toward an unexpected hope at the end. Okay, first up, the parable of the vine. Now, in the scriptures, Israel was very often pictured as God's grapevine. This was a huge source of national pride, right? It was a symbol of their special relationship with God, who had planted them and cared for them in the Promised Land. What's so brilliant here is Ezekiel's brutally practical logic. He asks a simple question. Besides its fruit, what is a grapevine actually good for? I mean, think about it. The wood is soft, it's all twisted and weak. You can't build anything with it. He says you can't even carve a simple little peg from it to hang a pot on. A vine has one job, one single purpose: to bear fruit. And here's the key takeaway. It's not about who you are, it's about what you're for. So, if Israel, God's vine, had stopped producing the fruit of faithfulness and justice, what was it good for? Well, God's answer through Ezekiel is stark. It's only good for fuel. He even describes the city as a piece of wood with its two ends already burned and the middle charred, which was a direct reference to Babylon's previous attacks. Judgment wasn't just some future thing, it had already started. So let's move on to the next picture sermon, and you'll see how this escalates. Ezekiel shifts from this kind of impersonal image of a plant to something deeply personal, incredibly graphic, and, to be honest, pretty shocking. He tells the story of Jerusalem as God's wife, and he does this to show the profound intimacy of their relationship and the horrifying depth of their betrayal. This is basically the entire history of Israel in a nutshell. He reminds them of where they came from, like an abandoned baby, born of Canaanite people, just left in a field to die. But God saw her, rescued her, and raised her. And then he made her his own, entering into a covenant. She grew up to be this stunningly beautiful queen, famous everywhere, especially during the time of David and Solomon. But then she forgot. She forgot where she came from. She started trusting in her own beauty and began this long, sordid history of unfaithfulness. This verse right here is the heart of the whole allegory. That covenant God made with Israel at Mount Sinai, it wasn't just some legal contract. It was a marriage vow. The text says he spread his skirt over her, which was a symbolic act of proposal. So for them to worship other gods, that wasn't just breaking a rule, it was spiritual adultery. It was the deepest, most personal kind of betrayal you can imagine. And the details are just sickening. Ezekiel just lists them out one after another. They built pagan shrines on every street corner. They took the very gold and silver God had blessed them with and used it to make idols. They got into these depraved Canaanite fertility rituals. And then, in the ultimate act of horror, they sacrificed their own children in the fire to the god Molech. Even their political deals with other countries were seen as adultery, a complete failure to trust their divine husband for protection. And then Ezekiel delivers the final devastating insult. He says Jerusalem is worse than a common prostitute. Why? Because a prostitute gets paid for what she does. But Israel was so desperate for these adulterous alliances that she paid them. She offered up her wealth to Egypt and Assyria, basically bribing them to be her lovers. The perversion was just absolute. Okay, for his third picture sermon, Ezekiel shifts from spiritual history to the immediate political crisis that Jerusalem's leaders were facing. He lays out this riddle, which is almost like a political cartoon, involving two great eagles, a cedar tree, and a vine. So let's break this down. The first great majestic eagle, that's King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He came to Jerusalem, got rid of their king, and planted a new, smaller vine, a puppet king named Zedekiah. But then, this vine sees another eagle, Pharaoh of Egypt, and foolishly turns its roots toward him, hoping for a rescue. The imagery here makes it crystal clear. Babylon is the real power. Trusting in Egypt was just a foolish, foolish move. And right there is the central conflict. See, King Zedekiah had made a sworn covenant, a treaty of loyalty with Nebuchadnezzar. So by sending messengers to Egypt asking for military help, he was breaking that solemn oath. Ezekiel just asks these obvious questions. Will he succeed? Can he who does such things escape? And the implied answer, of course, is a resounding no way. And this is where the betrayal really cuts to the core. Zedekiah's sin was twofold. Nebuchadnezzar had made him swear that oath of loyalty in the name of the Lord God. So when Zedekiah broke his deal with Babylon, he was also breaking his oath to God. It wasn't just a political blunder. It was a public statement that he didn't trust God to protect him, and he didn't believe God was actually in control. So, after these three devastating pictures, a useless vine good only for the fire, an adulterous wife who deserves public shame, and a treacherous king who is doomed to fail, the message is painfully clear. Israel's sin was deep, it was multifaceted, and the consequences were absolutely unavoidable. There was no escaping it. Their false confidence was a complete fantasy. The city was going to fall, the temple would be destroyed, and the people would be exiled. All those covenant curses they had agreed to way back at Mount Sinai, they were about to be fully enacted. And right here, at what seems like the moment of deepest despair, Ezekiel pivots. Because with God, judgment is never, ever the final word. Yes, he's a God of justice, but he is also a God of covenant faithfulness and just radical grace. And what a brilliant way to illustrate God's ultimate plan. Using the exact same imagery from the riddle, God declares that he will now be the great eagle. He says, I myself will take a tiny little sprig from the top of the cedar, from the royal line of David, and plant it on the mountain of Israel. And this branch will grow into a huge, majestic tree, a tree where birds of every kind, representing all the nations, will come and find shelter. This is just a stunning messianic promise. You see, this promise connects all the way back to God's unbreakable covenant with King David. So even as God was judging the unfaithful kings on David's throne, he wasn't abandoning his promise. No, he would provide a future king, a true son of David, whose kingdom would have no end. And of course, this is the promise that finds its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ. And so this whole story of blessing and betrayal and restoration, it leaves us with a really profound question to think about for ourselves. Israel's sin, it all started when they took the blessings God gave them, their beauty, their wealth, their land, and they forgot the one who gave it to them. They started to boast as if they had achieved it all on their own. And that challenges us to look at our own lives and ask that same question. What do we have that we did not receive? And how are we using those gifts?